Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Apologies for the slight delay in between videos, but it's been a bit of a mad, hectic time at Tottenham Hotspur, as it always is. But we're back. And, the main news this week, not so much Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, more Spurs Wars, The Rise of Toby Alderweireld, because if you'd have asked anyone, probably about 6 months, a year ago, whether Toby Alderweireld would be committing his long-term future to Tottenham Hotspur, the answer would have been a resounding no. But here we are, signed a new deal until 2023, a 3.5-year deal. Obviously was going to run out in the summer. And that's pretty much because all the circumstances around him have kind of changed. I think I wrote a piece about a month ago just saying that things were starting to turn in a slightly different direction for Alderweireld. I think there's so many factors. I mean, obviously, the most glaring one is a change in manager. There's no denying that. As for all of Pochettino's successes and the fact that I also feel he developed Toby Alderweireld quite a lot, there was kind of always this feeling at Tottenham that his idea of the centre-back partnership going forward was Davinson Sanchez and Jan Vertonghen. If you remember that year where Alderweireld picked up that serious hamstring injury, he was pretty much found himself out of the team on the whole from even the time he got back. I think he came back around Christmas time, and for the rest of the season, obviously the fitness was used as an understandable reason for not getting him in there, and the fact that Sanchez and Vertonghen had formed a good partnership, but he just didn't ever feel Alderweireld from that point on like he was Pochettino's chosen one. And obviously there were behind the scenes as well, there were issues in even getting him to sign a new deal. I remember, I think it was January 2018 was Spurs' last offer. I understand they offered something around 130, I think it was, and his team wanted around 180. So that never happened. And then there was nothing else. Almost 2 years with nothing happening. And then Mourinho's come in. A manager who absolutely adores Alderweireld, made no secret of it, tried to sign him at Man United. And as soon as he was here, it was clear Alderweireld was going to be one of his main men. And also behind the scenes in Alderweireld's side of things, he's about to become a dad for the second time. His family incredibly settled in London. And also from the financial point of view, and that supply and demand, as it were, there were no bids for him in the summer, other than the one bid from Roma, which I understand was around £12 million. So you've got a player of the quality of Toby Alderweireld sitting there throughout a summer where he had a clause until the final 2 weeks, where he could be bought by £25 million from any club. Not one club made that offer, which is mind-boggling, because we know what Toby Alderweireld can be like. At his best, even at his average, he is a terrific Premier League defender. So maybe that was a little bit of wake-up call to his team around him, his representatives, showing that actually, when it comes to the summer, are we going to get a better offer than we can actually get from Tottenham? And, and the player himself has been very consistent in the message he's put out. He's always said that he's really happy at Tottenham. And as Mourinho pointed out yesterday, it was very telling, his comments, that, I couldn't be happier at any other club out there. And I think with Mourinho, his quotes about Mourinho soon after he came in were just, he was like absolutely privileged, he felt, to be working for someone like Mourinho and stuff like that, and hope he would sort him, develop him in the future, I think were his words as well. So as soon as these little things start all mounting up, and they do fit the jigsaw together, and that's why Toby Alderweireld is staying, and it's a complete U-turn on from where we were 6 months to a year ago, and I think it's great news for Spurs. I think he hasn't been his absolute best this season, but then I think that's probably the same that can be said about most of the team, particularly the defence. And I think it's an important foundation, because as well and good as it is to have a rebuild, bring new, fresh young players in, if you can keep an experienced player who is one of the best around in your team, you'd be daft not to do it. And that looks like that's happened now. Now it's about the remaining two. I know Michel Vorm obviously is up in the summer, but we don't kind of lump him in with this little contract trio. Jan Vertonghen, he wants to stay at Tottenham. He does. There's no bones about it. He does. Weirdly, it was pointed out to me, I hadn't even noticed it. He'd liked my tweet yesterday about Toby Alderweireld signing the new contract. And anyone that saw Vertonghen's video did a little video of Alderweireld as well, with a little symbol of a pen and money bags and all this sort of stuff. Vertonghen wants to stay at Tottenham. The issue is obviously the length of the contract. Spurs now don't have this. They've kind of blown out their own rule about players in their 30s getting longer contracts, because we now have seen Alderweireld getting one for 3.5 years, and Sissoko, technically all in, was a 4-year deal, 1-year option on top of 3. So that's not a thing now. Obviously, Vertonghen's a little bit older. Those two, I think, are both 30, and Vertonghen's 32. And it sounds like Spurs are only offering the 1-year extension, whereas he wants 2 at least, which I'd be surprised. I really would be surprised. I think he's a guy that's maybe up until this last year has always been in absolute top condition. I remember Pochettino saying he could play until he was 40. He was in such good condition. So I'd be surprised if they can't come to a compromise. Mourinho hinted heavily, I believe. You want to read his quotes he spoke to, he kind of seemed to hint that the agent perhaps is one that's looking out for other moves to see if he can get better offers elsewhere for Vertonghen, because obviously next month he can talk to people for free for about a summer move. So I'd be surprised if Alderweireld's sticking around, and Vertonghen has always wanted to stick around. Mourinho wants Vertonghen to stay. He said that. I'd be stunned if they can't get a deal done. And I think talking about the agent puts a little bit of pressure on as well. The agents, they're kind of know his agent. Well, know of them, his agency, and then they're all very close with their Belgian. I think they represent Alderweireld and Ndombele as well, and a few other Belgian clients, and they're a very kind of close knit thing. So I think if Vertonghen wants to get a deal done, I think the agents are, they're not bad people. I think they will look to try and get that done as well. So hopefully, because I do feel that even Vertonghen, kind of a declining Vertonghen, if that's what he's going to be, I do feel that's you still need that experience for the younger players that are coming through, and especially with the way Mourinho works with the defence. Final one, obviously, is Eriksen. We all know Eriksen wants to leave. Mourinho said yesterday he wants Eriksen to stay, but he wouldn't say any more. I think we all know that Eriksen is on his way. He's made it very clear he wants a new challenge, and he's not even playing at the moment. Mourinho said his team selections would show what Eriksen's future was about, or the club's future, and he's not starting games, other than in Munich. And it's going to happen, isn't it? Whether it happens in January, I do think we're at the situation now, especially if he's not playing, which is maybe part of the whole plan, that Eriksen will want to move on in January. Otherwise, he's not getting football. And Spurs, if he goes in January, obviously could get some kind of fee for him, although nominal, you'd think at this stage. And that maybe would free up a space for Lo Celso to get more game time, or possibly even Spurs to look at bringing in someone else in January. Although we'll come to that as well. Sorry, I know that's one of my expressions. I wanted to also mention a little thing that's popped up online today, if you haven't noticed it. Some naughty scamp has taped Daniel Levy and Jose Mourinho's Christmas speech at the club Christmas party, which I don't know. I'm not sure whether that was this week or not. It looks like it was filmed very recently, so I'd imagine it was this week. It's quite an interesting little piece if you want to listen to it. I spotted it on Facebook. Levy just pretty much thanking everyone for everything that's happened this year and kind of going through what's happened in the months that's gone. Didn't refer to Pochettino, which I thought was a little bit sad, but then I guess, maybe you do just look to the future in these kind of things. But what he also said is his Christmas list is a top 4 place and a trophy. So that's, although he's very clear he never puts demands on anyone, he's actually, now that video's come out, has kind of done that. And Mourinho's response was was classic Mourinho, really. He said, the chairman's now put pressure on me, but to be honest, I love that kind of pressure. That's what I need, and if I don't get that pressure, I'll only put it on myself as well. So, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how that partnership, that dynamic works over the years, because, we know Pochettino spent 5.5 years with him and still ended up getting the chop. And he was a very sympathetic, understanding guy, Pochettino. And the relationship still, on a personal level, I think it still worked, but towards the end, working-wise, it didn't. So with Mourinho, someone that's far more fiery, it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes going forward. On Pochettino, there's also a Pochettino interview that's popped up today. He's out in Doha for the Club World Cup stuff. He's out there with Jesus Perez. You might have seen little videos and stuff of him playing foot golf. Rob Harris of Associated Press has managed to grab him out there for a very quick interview. It's interesting. What I would say, it's clearly a man who can't talk too much about stuff or doesn't want to. But it's interesting, he kind of acknowledges the fact that football now it just shows, even with his firing, that football is a short-term game, and you're not going to get the likes of Wenger and Sir Alex Ferguson anymore. That's just the way football is. It's about a more short-term view on things, and if you don't get the results, that's that. I think Mourinho kind of alluded to a similar thing in his press conference yesterday, when he spoke about maybe managers now are hired because they've had less defeats than the fact that they've won more. Kind of looking at the fact that young. Even like, I don't think it was a dig at Arteta. Obviously, Arteta is now the Arsenal boss, and he hasn't even had one defeat yet. But there's this kind of trend now of maybe going towards younger managers and the older ones, who obviously have racked up the losses, but have racked up many, many wins as well. And football is definitely changing. We know it. There's so many financial pressures involved. So, yeah, now have a look at that interview. If I'm going to be incredibly harsh, there's nothing mind-blowing, but I don't think that's a fault of the interview itself. I do feel there's outside circumstances that are probably dictating what can be said, but there's enough in there that makes it an interesting read all the same. Talk about the press conference yesterday, another good one from Mourinho. At the moment, we're getting lots of good stuff out of Mourinho. He's in his happy place, and he's, you get really good value from him. I asked him a few questions yesterday. I asked him Ndombele, I said, because obviously Ndombele is back in training now, and he told me he's fit for the weekend if he needs to use him. I asked him kind of where he sees him position-wise and what his role is going to be for the team going forward, because there's a few fears, obviously, that while he's shown some great glimpses of what he can do, there's also a little worry about how he kind of fits into the Premier League, because, as I've said before, he looks absolutely shattered. I've seen him in a warm-up looking knackered on Ndombele. So, yeah, I mean, Mourinho was quite good on him. He said, look, he's such a versatile, multifunctional player, and that he can play in a 6, an 8, or a 10 role as well. He said he can play in so many roles that he's always going to have some kind of spot he can use him in. And he said he's an absolutely fantastic prospect, was the term he used. Fantastic potential. Actually, I think it was fantastic talent. It was even more than potential. It was fantastic talent. But what he did say is he still needs to adapt to the physicality of the English game, and also needs to have a Premier League mentality, which I thought was quite interesting. And I think that's everything, isn't it? I think that's, looking at diet, looking at strength, looking at exercise, looking at the way he looks after himself, the way he approaches matches. And we mustn't forget he's only 22. He only came into top flight football quite recently. He was at Lyon. I think it was only 2 years before that. He was in the 5th tier of French football, I think it was, maybe slightly before that. But, this is a guy, relatively, who's come into the professional game in the top echelons, how do you pronounce it? Echelons of football quite late in his kind of career, albeit a young career. So he's learning out, he's catching up, and I think I was quite enthused, actually. I thought Mourinho really showed that this guy, club record signing for Spurs, let's not forget, is going to be a big, big player going forward. I think it's just a case of integrating him. And I kind of get the feeling it's a bit the same with Lo Celso. People are getting a bit worried about Lo Celso because he's barely playing, and he wasn't great in Munich either. But Spurs, I think, are going to end up with him anyway. Mourinho's objective is top 4. Spurs finish top 4. They permanently sign Lo Celso. That's part of the deal. He is signed, I think it's for, I've got a feeling it's around 34 million. Spurs do have an option next month to buy him. I think it's around 27 million. So the Real Betis president has come out since and said, he believes that's what will happen. He thinks they'll buy him next month. So I do feel that, he's a guy that's got so much to offer. And I think Mourinho's just being cautious with him. He hasn't exploded onto the scene. He's looked good in the 2 starts he had under Poch before Pochettino left. But I do believe, I kind of understand what Mourinho's saying. He still needs to adapt to the Premier League. And I think he will get minutes. We've got games coming up over the festive period. They're going to come thick and fast, and he's going to play matches. It's just a case of him finding his role in the team. So, yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about Lo Celso. What else? I asked Mourinho what he's been doing differently in training this week, because this is the first full week Mourinho's had with the players without any interruptions, any matches in midweek, any international commitments. And he said, to be honest, it's more about intensity. He said, in a normal week with these games in the middle, you kind of have to do everything. The term he used was passive opposition. So you can't have players properly going into tackles. You can't have an aggressive intensity in the way they play, which puts the players under pressure, and actually properly simulating match scenarios and tactics. And he says, whereas this week, he gave them a couple of days off. Monday and Tuesday, they were all off around the Europe and wherever, kind of having a bit of a relaxing few days after a very tough game at Wolves. But then from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it was back to really kind of fast and furious, getting some of his principles instilled in this team. And it was quite interesting. Have a look back. I put the transcript up yesterday of everything he said, and have a little read of those answers, because, yeah, it's quite a little insight, I feel, into how Spurs are going to be. He said that, he couldn't rule out that they're going to change the way they kind of look, the way they line up, perhaps a different formation. He kind of said that I've been trying to create a stable team in the recent weeks. Now it's about kind of creating something that's probably more a Mourinho team, I guess. So that was quite interesting. He spoke about Hugo Lloris as well. Lots and lots of praise for Hugo Lloris. Kind of called him an absolute champion as a man as well. I'd be stunned if we see a switch. I know some people have said maybe Kane will be the captain even when Lloris comes back, but I think the way... I'm going to ask him about it anyway, but I do feel that the way Mourinho was talking about Lloris, that's going to be his captain as well, his club captain. I think he's a man that likes lots of leaders on the pitch. Like, I think he had John Terry was captain, wasn't he? But Lampard was just as much of a leader, really. And I do feel that would probably be the way with Lloris and Kane. But he also said, Lloris, he said his process, he thinks he'll be back in February, but he wouldn't be drawn on when. He said February's obviously a long month, 1st to the 29th, it will be next year. So he said any time during then, but he thinks it will be February. So that'd be interesting. I think there's a good chance for Gazzaniga to kind of stamp his mark on this team and get that shirt kind of under his control for when Lloris comes back. And I think I've seen a lot of improvement in Gazzaniga recent weeks. I thought he was a bit shaky when he started off, but he was looking good. What else we've got to talk about? So I'm trying to wrap my mind, because I haven't done a video, I think, for about 12 days now. So Daniel Levy interview. James Ollie from the Evening Standard. Fair play, sir, because he managed to tie down a man who hasn't done an interview or a proper sit-down interview with a journalist for, or certainly a written journalist, for a good 10 years or so. So he managed to sit him down and got loads of good stuff out of him. Spoke about the stadium, all the issues they had, the problems that they went through doing that, how tough it was to sack Mauricio Pochettino and then bringing in Jose Mourinho, how that all worked. I think fans will probably take away from it his January window comments. He said, he pointed to what Mourinho had said about looking to do what he can with this squad rather than sign anyone. He kind of made it clear that was going to be more the mentality. As I've said before, it is a bit weird when a new manager comes in, because essentially for Mourinho, he's got, 25 new signings. So he probably isn't in the place where he desperately needs to go out and make changes. And I think Levy will probably be very happy with that. I think the only thing that would maybe change that if you do see a couple of outgoings, so if Eriksen goes, if Wanyama, I'd be stunned if Wanyama doesn't go, and if maybe, previously we might have looked at Sergio Aurier's potential exit, but Mourinho's kind of getting a tune out of him. He can still be a bit inconsistent, but certainly under the Mourinho era, he's been a little bit more controlled as Sergio Aurier can be. So you might find that he's not one to go in January. Maybe they'll reassess the situation in the summer. But yeah, a lot depends maybe on those contracts. And if Vertonghen isn't going to sign a new deal, maybe they need to look at another central defender. He was very impressed with Juan Foyth at Munich. I think Juan Foyth is probably one of those fringe players who's absolutely made an impression. And I think we'll see Foyth start probably over the next few matches. I think that we'll see him get a Christmas start, definitely. It's a tough one. I mean, there's the backup striker. There's so many roles. We can look from the outside and say that Spurs need this and that and whatever. But I do get the impression that it's going to be very much, if someone goes out, then they'll bring someone in, rather than they look to target to bring anyone in before that happens. So keep an eye on that. But I think Levy's comments in that interview, which is really good, have a read of it. It's online on the Standard website now. Have a little read. There's quite a few bits. James Ollie's done really, really well with that. It's Chelsea next, isn't it? It's Chelsea next. We can't really go anywhere else than that. I mean, there's no point looking back over previous matches. Very briefly, Munich obviously was a very kind of mixed team, wasn't it? You can't really take too much from it. Like I said, Foyth did well. Sessegnon had a good game, lovely goal. I felt some people criticised him getting back. I actually felt he helped Danny Rose out quite a lot. And Danny Rose said that in his post-match interview, that Sessegnon kind of came back and did well. So be interesting to see how he develops, and the way Mourinho obviously wants him to develop initially as an attacking player and then in future years as a left-back. So no, I thought he did his cause good. Lo Celso, not too great. Lucas had a quiet game, and then I thought Son came on and woke up Eriksen, but then Son missed a couple of chances. Then we had Wolves. Wolves was ugly, was absolutely a performance beaten with the ugly stick, but it got the job done. They did, and I felt the most pleasing thing for me about that performance was defending. I felt that they looked far more organised, despite all the pressure that Wolves had. If you kind of actually look at how many saves Gazaniga had to make, and they were very good saves, because especially pushing them away from oncoming attackers, didn't actually have that many. It was only 2 or 3, and their goal was obviously that long-distance rocket from Traore. So I thought defensive-wise, actually, it looked like, you could see where that defence is going. I do like the Vertonghen as a left-back tucking in. I do think that works as well. Vertonghen probably doesn't love it. I think he's admitted as much. It's not his favoured role, but it kind of works. And I feel he's a safer bet there than Rose. I think Davies maybe, even Vertonghen alluded to that after the game, that Davies maybe was going to be the man who played there. He was obviously started against West Ham in that role, didn't he? And may well be the future of that role as a left back who can also cut inside, tuck inside. But I'd like to see Vertonghen make that his own as well. But yeah, so gritty win, and it all brings us to Sunday, where the 12-point gap when Mourinho started has now all but vanished, other than those 3 points. Spurs beat Chelsea. Suddenly, they're in the top 4 for Christmas, and everything has absolutely transformed. They've been fortunate in terms of other teams have dropped points around them, so they've really been leapfrogging everyone, not just gaining ground on Chelsea. But ultimately, it's down to Spurs. They could only do what they had to do, and United aside, and obviously the Munich game away, which it's a tough one to count because it's a strange game. They've done their job. They've ground out some results. They've scored goals. They've conceded goals as well. But like I said, I think that is getting better defensive-wise. I think it's going to be a really, really intriguing clash on Sunday tomorrow, because you've got a Chelsea team who's stuttering and stumbling, lost a bit of that momentum, and Spurs seem to have found it again. And obviously we've got the I was going to say the Jedi Master and the Padawan going all Star Wars again. I did see it last night, which is why my brain's in Star Wars mode. It was very good. The Frank Lampard, obviously, and Jose Mourinho. Lampard's won their only match, I think, against each other so far. Derby in the Cup knocked United out. I think it was on penalties, wasn't it? So he's got that behind him, but also, Mourinho's had this week, which will be very important to drill in new ideas. And he said himself, he'll be really disappointed if we don't see an improved Tottenham from the one we've seen in recent weeks. Obviously, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, the noise is going to be ridiculous. I'd be stunned if the fans aren't up for this one. If you're not going to get up for a London derby at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with the chance to go into the top 4 at Christmas, you're not going to get up for anything, are you, quite frankly? It should be raucous, loud, absolutely explosive atmosphere, which should be great. And Spurs-Chelsea games kind of always are like that. And be interesting to see how Mourinho against Chelsea works. He said yesterday, I am 100% Tottenham Hotspur. Whatever's in the past is in the past. My club is always the biggest, best club for me. It's my club that I will leave everything up or put everything into. And we shall find that out tomorrow. I think we'll see a couple of changes. I wouldn't be surprised if Winks and Dyer is maybe the partnership in the middle, with potentially Sissoko moving back up into that. Mourinho said his favoured role for him is that right of the 3 behind Kane. Harsh on Lucas, who scored an absolutely cracking goal against Wolves, and I thought played well, but I do wonder whether in terms of more bodies and power in the midfield, whether Sissoko plays there and can then tuck into a 3 if needed. I think maybe might come a little bit too early for Ndombele, having only just returned, whereas Winks has been a good 8-9 days of full training, and obviously knows what a derby requires as well. I think the midfield's where we're going to see changes. Elsewhere, there's so many lockdown positions now. We know Son, Dele, Kane's going to start, Alderweireld, Vertonghen and Sanchez are probably going to start, Aurier, Gazaniga. It pretty much is those two roles. I feel whoever plays alongside Dyer and whoever plays on the right of that midfield three behind Kane, I think they're the two roles that are kind of still up for grabs. I think Lucas, like I said, has done well recently, but hasn't quite nailed it down. And I feel he hasn't also, Mourinho, decided on who plays alongside Dyer. So they're the two spots up for grabs. Unless he goes rogue and decides to completely change it up because of whatever he's been working on this week. We shall see. It's going to be excellent. I'm going to be there tomorrow, obviously. Next video will probably be... might try and do one Christmas Eve if I can, if I'm allowed to by the family. Because we'll have had there's a press conference on Monday ahead of the match against Brighton on Boxing Day. So maybe we'll have a little chat about that. But here's to an enormous match tomorrow. Hopefully Spurs will be talking about Spurs in the top four come Christmas, because that'll complete a remarkable comeback over the last month or so. But just most of all, let's hope we're talking about a good match. I shall catch you later.